He stayed late at the office, and she stayed too. What happened next changed everything. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the soft whir of the air conditioner. The city beyond the glass walls was a mosaic of twinkling streetlights and distant traffic, a gentle reminder that the world was moving on while he remained behind. He, a 25-year-old analyst, was hunched over his desk, fingers flying across the keyboard as he finished reports that no one else seemed to care about. The silence was heavy but oddly comforting. It allowed his thoughts to wander, uninterrupted. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, she appeared. His boss, a striking woman of 42, entered the room with a calm confidence that seemed to fill the space even before she spoke. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, each tap echoing in the quiet room like a metronome of authority and grace. There was something magnetic about the way she moved, measured, deliberate, yet effortless, as if the office were a stage and she knew every line. He didn't notice the time passing until the subtle scent of her perfume reached him, a delicate blend of jasmine and cedarwood that was both familiar and tantalizingly new. He realized she had stopped just behind him, her presence immediately felt even without words. She leaned slightly over his desk to hand him a folder, and for a brief moment, their fingers brushed. It was nothing overt, nothing meant to shock, but the fleeting warmth left a curious ache in his chest. He felt the pull of her gaze on him, steady yet gentle, as if she were studying more than his work, studying him. There was a quiet respect in her eyes, but layered beneath it was a subtle curiosity, a recognition of the shared stillness between them. He found himself acutely aware of the rhythm of her movements, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the soft sigh she let out as she adjusted her blazer. Every small gesture seemed magnified in the empty office, creating an intimacy born from silence rather than conversation. As she straightened and prepared to leave, he caught the smallest smile playing at the corner of her lips, a hint of something unspoken. Their eyes met again, lingering just long enough to make his heart skip, and he realized he had been waiting for this, though he didn't know exactly what this was. The office, once a place of work and routine, had transformed into a space of unspoken connection, the quiet moments charged with possibility. In that still, almost sacred after-hours glow, he sensed the beginning of something unexpected, something that had the potential to unfold slowly, like a story written between the lines of everyday life. And he, for the first time, didn't mind staying late. The office was bathed in the soft glow of desk lamps now, the harsh overhead lights dimmed as though the room itself was leaning into the quiet of evening. He was still hunched over his spreadsheets, fingers frozen for a moment as he tried to focus, but the words on the screen blurred. He felt it before he saw it, the subtle shift in the air as she approached. She stopped just beside him, her presence immediate and grounding. Her perfume drifted again, a soft, woody floral that seemed to wrap around him, pulling his senses toward her. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint brush of her sleeve against his arm as she leaned closer to hand him a folder. That touch, accidental or deliberate, lingered just a heartbeat too long, and he felt a strange thrill at the simple contact. Then she spoke, her voice low, smooth, and intimate, just above the whisper that the quiet office allowed. "Consider this your reward for staying late." The words, seemingly casual, hit him in ways he couldn't name. It wasn't the phrasing, or even the teasing tone, it was the way she said it, close enough that he felt the warmth of her breath near his ear. His chest tightened unexpectedly, and he caught himself holding his breath for just a moment. He looked up and found her watching him, a faint, knowing smile tugging at her lips. There was a spark there, subtle, yet undeniable, a tension that existed in the space between them, electric and fragile. He wanted to laugh, to shake off the sudden heat crawling up his neck, but the pull of her presence held him still. Even the ordinary gesture of taking the folder from her hand became charged with unspoken meaning. The brush of her fingers, the soft exhale of her breath, the tilt of her head as she observed him, it all whispered a promise that went beyond words. For a fleeting moment, the office transformed. The quiet hum of the air conditioner and the distant city lights faded into the background. It was just them, him acutely aware of every detail of her presence, the curve of her shoulder, the soft sway of her hair, the faint rhythm of her heartbeat in the silence, and her aware of his gaze lingering just a fraction too long. When she straightened and stepped back, the space she left behind felt heavier than before, like the memory of warmth that refuses to fade. He realized, with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation, that the evening had shifted. What had begun as a routine late night now carried an unspoken promise, an invitation into something quietly intimate, something neither of them had fully named yet. And in that suspended moment, he understood that whatever was beginning between them would unfold slowly, deliberately, and impossibly powerfully. The late nights became a quiet rhythm between them, almost imperceptible at first. He arrived at the office, expecting nothing more than the usual hum of fluorescent lights and the endless flow of reports. Yet somehow, she was always there, not out of necessity, but seemingly by choice. The awareness of her presence had begun to sink into him, a subtle undercurrent of warmth that made even mundane tasks feel charged with quiet anticipation. Small interactions began to take on meaning. When she passed him his morning coffee, her fingers brushed lightly against his wrist, lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. A simple smile as she walked past his desk made his chest tighten in ways he had never expected. Each time she leaned over his shoulder to point out a detail on a spreadsheet, he felt the weight of her presence more acutely, the warmth of her arm near his, the soft exhale of her breath mingling with the faint scent of her perfume. These fleeting touches, accidental or deliberate, seemed to stretch time, leaving him aware of every subtle movement, every small gesture. He began noticing the nuances of her habits, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the quiet hum she made when lost in concentration, the soft sigh when a particularly complex task was resolved. It was in these tiny, intimate details that he found himself drawn to her, not just as a boss, but as someone profoundly human, someone whose presence could calm him even in the most tedious moments. The glances they shared became a language of their own. A lingering look over his shoulder, a fleeting catch of her eye across the room, or the way she paused mid-step, as if waiting for him to notice her. These unspoken exchanges carried a weight that neither had yet dared to articulate. The office, once a sterile environment of tasks and deadlines, had transformed into a space of quiet connection, a stage where emotions moved slowly, deliberately, and tangibly. Even in silence, there was intimacy. The brush of knees under a conference table, the shared laughter over a minor mistake, the proximity when she guided him through a complicated report, each moment built a tapestry of subtle tension. He became aware of the way her presence made his own movements more deliberate, more mindful. The world outside ceased to matter, it was only them, caught in the delicate balance between professional respect and growing, unspoken attraction. By the end of each night, he would find himself reflecting on these small, lingering moments, wondering how such simple interactions could carry such weight. He knew the connection between them was deepening, quietly and irresistibly, and that each glance, touch, and shared silence was part of a slow, deliberate unfolding that neither of them could, or wanted, to rush. The quiet rhythm of their late nights together had begun to leave a tangible impression on him. He found himself anticipating her presence with a mixture of eagerness and apprehension, each glance and fleeting touch stirring emotions he had not expected. Yet along with that excitement came hesitation, a quiet conflict rooted in reality. She was his boss, older, experienced, and poised, a woman who carried herself with authority and grace. How could he, a younger man just beginning to understand the depth of his own emotions, navigate the delicate line between admiration and desire? He noticed the subtle ways she tested him without words. Sometimes she would linger near his desk, offering guidance with a gentle hand on his shoulder. Other times, she would laugh softly at a joke he barely meant to be funny, her eyes holding a warmth that seemed to reach deeper than casual camaraderie. Each interaction made him more aware of the electric charge that hummed between them, but also of the social and professional boundaries that surrounded them. The conflict became almost physical. His heart raced in anticipation of her presence, yet he hesitated to act on the growing attraction, unsure if it was proper, or even wise. A brush of her knee under the table, a hand accidentally resting against his arm, sent shivers up his spine, leaving him both exhilarated and guilty. He caught himself lingering on the sound of her voice, the soft cadence that carried authority and warmth in equal measure. It was intoxicating, yet it reminded him of the stakes, the potential consequences of misreading the signals. He began replaying moments in his mind, analyzing her gestures and words, wondering if she felt the same undercurrent of tension. Every smile, every casual touch, seemed weighted with meaning, but he could not be certain. The office became a place of quiet moral and emotional navigation, where the thrill of connection was intertwined with the caution imposed by reality. She, perceptive as ever, seemed aware of his internal struggle. Occasionally, she would pause near him just a heartbeat longer than necessary, or tilt her head in a way that invited conversation but not intrusion. The small, silent gestures, an encouraging nod, a softening of her gaze, offered reassurance while maintaining the balance between professional and personal. By the end of each evening, he would leave the office with his mind buzzing, caught between desire and hesitation, excitement and restraint. The emotional tension was growing, quietly but insistently, setting the stage for the deeper intimacy that was waiting to unfold. He realized that navigating these conflicted emotions was not just about restraint, it was about understanding the depth of connection forming between them, delicate, complex, and impossibly compelling. The office was quieter than usual that night, the usual hum of computers and faint city noise softened by the late hour. He was at his desk, attempting to focus on numbers and charts, but the weight of her presence made concentration nearly impossible. She moved through the room with her usual graceful ease, yet there was a subtle softness in her demeanor tonight, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. Something in her posture, the slight slump of her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of her desk, suggested that this evening would be different. She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, though not so close as to invade his personal space. Her voice, usually steady and measured, held an unusual tenderness as she began to share a story from her past, one of doubt, regret, and quiet longing. He listened, rapt, sensing layers beneath her composed exterior, layers she had carefully hidden behind authority and poise. The story was mundane on the surface, a challenge from years ago, a moment of personal failure, but in her telling, it became a window into her humanity. As she spoke, he realized he had never truly seen her like this before. Her eyes, usually so controlled, shimmered with a quiet honesty that made him want to reach out, to offer comfort. He found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by the sincerity of her words and the gentle cadence of her voice. For the first time, the distance that had always existed between boss and employee felt irrelevant, erased by the rawness of shared vulnerability. Then he spoke, his own voice quieter than he expected, "I've been looking forward to these late nights." The words slipped out almost before he could stop them, a confession that was both simple and profound. His gaze met hers, and he saw a flicker of understanding, a recognition of feelings long held but unspoken. The connection between them deepened in that suspended moment, a delicate thread of mutual awareness binding them together. Even as she smiled softly in response, the office seemed to cocoon them. The distant city lights, the hum of the air conditioning, the faint rustle of papers, they all faded into the background. What remained was the shared intimacy of that quiet space, the brush of her sleeve against his arm, the almost imperceptible warmth radiating from her shoulder, the unspoken acknowledgement that they were no longer just colleagues but two people discovering the contours of emotional closeness. By the end of their conversation, the tension had shifted. It was no longer just curiosity or attraction, it had become a bond built on trust, honesty, and subtle affection. They parted with a lingering glance, each acutely aware that something meaningful had begun, something slow, deliberate, and impossibly compelling, waiting to grow in the quiet, shared moments that stretched between them. The office was nearly empty now, the silence almost sacred. The hum of the air conditioner and the distant city lights beyond the glass walls created a gentle cocoon, isolating them from the world outside. He was at his desk, trying to focus on the remaining tasks, but he couldn't shake the awareness of her presence nearby. She had returned with a soft, measured step, carrying the calm authority that had always drawn him in, but tonight there was a subtle warmth, a softness that made the air between them almost tangible. She gestured for him to stay a little longer, her voice quiet yet commanding, laced with that familiar playfulness, "Consider this, just between us." The words hung in the space like a promise, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that had been building between them for weeks. It wasn't an invitation in the conventional sense, it was a recognition of shared understanding, a moment suspended in time. He shifted slightly in his chair, suddenly acutely aware of every detail, the soft curve of her shoulder near his, the faint scent of her perfume that seemed to swirl around them, the warmth radiating from her presence. When she moved closer to help him with a spreadsheet, their knees brushed lightly beneath the desk, sending a subtle shiver through him. It was a delicate touch, innocuous to anyone else, but electrifying to him in this intimate moment. Their hands almost met over the edge of a notebook, hovering in that quiet space where hesitation and anticipation collided. Neither moved away, and the simple nearness was enough to make his heart race. He could feel the rhythm of her breathing, steady and composed, yet somehow comforting. Her gaze lingered on him longer than necessary, soft, attentive, and entirely present. For a few stolen minutes, it was as though the world outside the office had ceased to exist. They shared a quiet laugh at a minor oversight, their shoulders brushing as they leaned toward the same page. Each touch, each glance, carried the weight of unspoken words, desires and emotions too delicate to voice, yet impossible to ignore. The office, once merely a place of work, had transformed into a private sanctuary of connection, a stage for emotions that moved deliberately, slowly, and undeniably. When she finally straightened and stepped back, leaving him with the lingering warmth of her presence, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment and anticipation all at once. The climax was quiet, subtle, yet undeniably powerful, a moment where attraction, respect, and emotional intimacy converged, setting the stage for the final resolution. In that after-hours glow, he realized that the bond they shared was no longer just an undercurrent, it was a quiet, profound certainty, waiting to unfold fully in its own time. The office lights had dimmed to a soft glow, leaving the city lights outside to paint gentle reflections on the glass walls. The late-night rhythm that had defined their connection for weeks now felt like a comfortable familiarity. He packed up his laptop slowly, aware of her presence beside him, close enough to feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. The tension that had built over countless late nights, charged glances, fleeting touches, unspoken confessions, was no longer heavy or uncertain. It had settled into something steady, quietly reassuring, and deeply human. She moved closer as they prepared to leave, her hand brushing lightly against his arm in a gesture that was both natural and intimate. It wasn't dramatic or overt, it didn't need to be. The simple contact carried the weight of their shared experiences, the subtle acknowledgement of what had been building between them. For a moment, he felt a deep sense of calm, a recognition that the slow burn of their connection had reached a point of quiet fulfillment. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, the city's hum wrapped around them like a soft background to their stillness. The warmth of her hand against his, the gentle sway of her presence as they walked side by side, made every step feel deliberate, connected. It was in these small, almost mundane gestures that their bond was fully realized. No words were necessary to convey the depth of feeling that had grown between them. She looked at him, eyes soft, lips curved in a small, knowing smile. He returned it, his chest lighter, heart steady yet alive with a quiet joy. In the gentle silence of shared proximity, he realized that this connection, so carefully nurtured over time, through glances, touches, and confessions, was more profound than anything he had anticipated. It was built on trust, mutual respect, and the patient unfolding of understanding. Before parting ways, she leaned in briefly, resting her cheek lightly against his shoulder, a fleeting touch that felt like the final affirmation of their journey. He felt her heartbeat for a heartbeat, steady and warm, and in that instant, he understood that the slow-burn romance they had shared had arrived at a place of quiet, enduring intimacy. As they finally said goodnight, walking away in opposite directions, there was a sense of completion, a story that had begun with fleeting touches and lingering glances had matured into something warm, balanced, and deeply human. The connection between them would continue to grow, naturally, deliberately, and always with the same tender awareness that had brought them to this perfect, satisfying moment. In that slow, unspoken understanding, the story reached its peaceful, emotionally rich conclusion. If you felt the slow burn of their connection, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to follow more heartwarming age gap romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in their shoes?